My name is Eddy Benoit Jr., founder and CEO of the Benoit Group, and this is Shape the Deal. We will discuss some of the secrets and strategies in the real estate process that will help you shape your next deal. Welcome to Shape the Deal. I also want to welcome my friends here who have joined me this morning so we could have a great real estate chat and share some nuggets with you guys about what really happens in the real estate deal. I have Amanda Rhein here to my left, who's joined us this morning, who's the executive director with the Atlanta Land Trust. And I also have good friend Ceasar Mitchell, who is partner with the very notable firm, Dentons law firm. Welcome this morning, guys. I'm glad y'all can join me.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to be here.
Listen, we're gonna have a good time. We're gonna share a little bit of these secrets that most people don't know about when they're putting these deals together. But I'm really happy to have, both of you this morning because there's just so much that you can share as from a knowledge standpoint, experiences, with this, with our audience. First and foremost, I'd like to just start with how did you get into the business? I started with you, Amanda.
Sure, yeah. Getting my undergraduate degree at Boston College, I knew that what I wanted to do was real estate related. I was interested in helping people, shaping the built environment for the folks that live there, affordable housing, things like that. And I knew that that's the career I wanted to pursue, but I didn't know what that career was. I didn't know that that career existed. So I started doing some research and found that the career of city planning was something that was really a great fit for the work that I sought to do. So I looked at grad schools across the country and ultimately ended up selecting Georgia Tech. I thought that Atlanta was a really interesting place. It's really a laboratory for the issues that city planners seek to solve. So I came to Atlanta to go to grad school and get my master's in city and regional planning. While I was at Georgia Tech, I ended up having an internship at Central Atlanta Progress, where I probably met Ceasar. That's probably the point in time I met him, working on some economic development tools that were being created in downtown Atlanta. Did not want to stay in Atlanta, but ended up getting a job at Invest Atlanta.
I think we met at Central Atlanta Progress too.
I was an intern there for a year, but it was a really formative experience for me because that's where I began to build my network in Atlanta and really got an understanding of the city. And so I was able then to leverage that into my role at Invest Atlanta, where I stayed for 10 years, working on tax allocation districts and other economic development tools, and really working directly with real estate developers. And that's kind of where I grew my passion for real estate, had the opportunity to work on a lot of big projects across the city of Atlanta, including Atlantic Station, and then had the opportunity to move over to MARTA, where I was hired by the general manager at that point, Keith Parker, who was looking to launch the Transit-Oriented Development Initiative. So I joined MARTA as the head of their real estate office and had an opportunity to help to implement that new initiative for them there. It was a wonderful experience. And then 5 years later, I had the opportunity to join the Land Trust. And what I saw in doing my work at Invest Atlanta and doing my work at MARTA is we were doing great things, attracting a lot of investment and new development to these communities, but there was always this unanticipated consequence of displacement. And so working at the Atlanta Land Trust was an opportunity for me to help mitigate that.
How about you, Ceasar?
I probably was the only person in my family that knew that I wanted to go into the real estate business. My mother is a school teacher. My father was a police officer and a minister. So there's nothing about real estate in our family or in my background. In fact, when I went to law school at the University of Georgia, I actually was very involved in moot court. And so most law students who come out of University of Georgia and have won a national championship in moot court don't go and become transactional lawyers. They go and they become litigators, and they spend most of their time in their career in the courthouse. And so when I graduated from the University of Georgia, having won a moot court championship on a national level, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and told my mom that I wanted to go and be a transactional lawyer, she said, "What's wrong with you, boy?" She said, "You just did all this as, to get you ready to be a litigator, and you want to go and practice transactional law?" I said, "Mom, I really have a passion for real estate and real estate development." I know you probably didn't notice when I was a kid that when you bought me little building blocks, I would go make cities with those building blocks. And if you ever saw me doodling, I was doodling, landscapes of skylines of cities. But really, the opportunity was afforded to me to get into real estate by the law firm of Thomas Kennedy Sampson and Patterson. And oftentimes, when you come out of law school, you don't have an opportunity to choose exactly what type of practice you want to start. You can ask, you can request, but you really are going to do what they tell you to do. And I was very fortunate that Tom Sampson and Andy Patterson and the lawyers at that firm allowed me to practice real estate law. And I'll dare say that my opportunity to practice real estate law led to my opportunity actually to become an elected official and ultimately the president of the Atlanta City Council. And I say that because in representing clients in real estate matters, I literally found the opportunity to meet the pastor of a church who was doing a building fund, who was borrowing money from a client that was a bank, or had an opportunity to meet a construction company owner. And so when you think about the things you need to go into elected office, candidly, it's you got to know folks who have money to raise money, and you got to know folks who have a pulpit or a bully pulpit. And oftentimes, of course, you find that in churches and the leaders of churches. So the opportunity for me to get into real estate really was born out of the first opportunity I had to practice law.
For me, it was a little bit different. I actually grew up in a family of engineers and contractors, and so I figured if I wanted to become a developer, it would only make sense, for me to go through the School of Building Construction at some university and become a general contractor, and that's how I'd become a developer. So I actually did that. I went to the University of Florida, got my bachelor's in building construction, and then I was recruited by Skanska to move here to Atlanta. So I thought life couldn't get any better. We were working on one major project here around the perimeter for a large developer, in town. And we did a whole presentation. And at the end of the presentation, the developer stood up and said, "Thank you for the presentation. Great job. However, I need the construction cost to come down by X dollars per square foot. But also I need the rental rates to go up by 15 cents a square foot. And I need to be able to prove that in order to make this project financially feasible." And I just stood there in awe, like, how did he know that? And immediately I enrolled into my master's program. And so, at university, back then it was called Southern Tech, who is now merged with Kennesaw State University. So it is so important to really understand what I call, the DNA of your deal. And the DNA is so important because of the fact that, that is the lifeline of your project. And that's how you figure if the project's gonna make sense or not. I call it the deal needs analysis. I use it here in our office, with our development team every day. The DNA of the deal, constantly understanding what it is, because that's what's going to shape what the deal is going to look like. Let's, shape the deal. And so that's how I pretty much got into the business, myself. And, since then it's been a roller coaster ride, lessons learned, but also it's almost been 30 years now. So it's been very interesting. One of the questions I always like to ask, my friends in the business is, what's the first mistake, you ever made on a deal that really cost you a lot? Couldn't sleep at night. Ceasar?
Well, as a lawyer, and that's a really good question. As a lawyer, you're constantly thinking about how you're going to not only, actually perform your craft and your trade, but also how are you going to have the opportunity to do the next deal. Yeah. And that's really about client development and building relationships in the industry where you want to actually practice and grow your business. And when I think about, and I remember this to this day, I was a young lawyer and I was handling a loan transaction, a couple of loan transactions for a developer who was building, a very well-known developer here in town who's done incredibly well in the affordable housing space. And we were going through a lot of the due diligence items, and we got into the closing table, and there were a couple of things that were missing. And this being an experienced developer, he said, well, you know, I can get that back to you. I'll get that back to you and we can handle that. Why don't we just do this later? Well, of course you have to have everything you need to actually close the deal, but I refused to close the deal. And what I could have done, candidly, was just say, let's set aside and create an escrow and break the escrow. And I just really just refused to go through with the deal. And he looked at me and said, he used some choice terms. I mean, he called me an, you know, I guess I can't say it the way I would like to say it, but
Yeah.
he called me everything but a child.
But your
of
name.
God. Yeah,
That's
but
right.
my name. And I'll never forget that because I could have handled the transaction a little differently. You know, at the end of the day, the deal closed, but I think I missed an opportunity to build a relationship
That's right.
with this particular person, this particular developer who is a well-respected developer here in town. I missed the opportunity to develop that relationship then. Now, ultimately, as time passed, he and I developed a very strong relationship. He's, you know, done quite well in the business, and I've been able to learn and observe, you know, what he's accomplished, and you can see his work all over town. But I often, whenever I see his work around town, I don't think about our great relationship. I think about that first interaction where I probably could have been or handled the transaction a little bit differently. Maybe if I had a little more experience, or maybe if I just had a little more security around my craft and trade.
Well, it's really like baptism by fire for you in that situation. And you would think as a young practicing attorney that your boss, you know, or bosses could prepare you and say, listen, this is the environment that you're about to be in. You know, as the developer, the owner, we're under so much pressure to get to that closing table. It's been about 14, 16, 2 years, sometimes 3 years to get to that culminating point of the closing. And then to have a young attorney, you know, be a stickler and said, you know what, we haven't checked this box, so we're not closing this deal. And you have probably 50 people on that closing statement that are waiting to get paid based on this closing. And a seller that is looking to receive, you know, his or her money. And this young attorney saying, we're not going to close. I could only imagine, you know, being in that situation.
No, absolutely, and it was really born. That situation was born out of my youth in the business,
Yeah.
and not understanding that while you got the technical issues associated with closing a deal and a due diligence checklist you have to actually complete, there's still a human element. There is a developer there, a person there who's invested a lot of time,
And money.
a lot of energy. And he's probably thinking, well, why didn't you make sure that I had this before I even got here to the closing table? And so you're right. At the end of the day, that was a learning experience for me because it taught me the human element, what's really going on in a deal in terms of you know, making it happen.
You know, as we focus on the acquisition side, you know, of the business, it is. You know, most people look at acquisition as far as just purchasing a building, but a lot of times it's acquiring land, or sometimes it's related to land assemblage. So you've got multiple building, land, a combination of the two in order to even start, you know, the deal opportunity that you're looking at. You know, Amanda, tell me, what was your first mistake?
Well, I have to say I've had many similar experiences to what Ceasar shared. As a young person, you're so focused on getting the task done, closing the transaction, just moving on to the next thing, checking the box, that you sometimes lose perspective of the bigger picture. And I think that's what happened with you. And I had a lot of experiences like that as a young person. But I think the most significant mistake that I made, the most challenging project I worked on as a young person happened when I was at MARTA, and we were working on a big transit-oriented development project. We had identified a development partner, had moved the project through a lot of community engagement, a lot of planning, a lot of due diligence, and we're ultimately faced with challenges with getting city approval on the rezoning. And we all know that rezoning is a really critical aspect to the acquisition process and fraught with challenges. and things that can blow up a deal entirely. So with this project, our mistake was we started the project with one administration, one mayoral administration. And over the course of the project, there was a change in leadership in the city that we were working in. And we did not do enough work to get buy-in from the new administration. Because we had done that work initially with the first administration, it moved to another administration, and we didn't spend enough time working with that administration to make sure they were supportive of the project. And our vision was aligned with theirs, and the project ended up getting blown up for that reason.
Wow. You know, most people don't think about the implications of, from a political standpoint,
It's huge.
as far as changing administration while you're going through a rezoning or going through a master plan development approval. Plus, they don't think about just the implications of the neighborhood, the community surrounding the project that they're working on. Like, you have NIMBYism. It's a reality. NIMBYism goes all the way through. It's not, you know, a lot of NIMBYism based on the type of product that you're building, whether it's commercial, retail, or even multifamily, affordability. Many people are, you know, afraid as to what affordability can do to their existing, you know, property values. You've got to deal with that. But even more, you know, importantly is, you know, with the zoning, sometimes you're looking for certain flexibilities and variances related to zoning, and you just can't get them in order to, you know, put the deal together. So I can understand exactly what you're talking about. I've been through many of these zoning meetings where they started throwing tomatoes at us, and at the end of the day, we had to pretty much pivot on our feet real quickly and explain to them that we're not like the other developer, you know, that came before you and didn't deliver what they're supposed to deliver. That's really, you know, at the end of the day, what we have to overcome in order to get through these processes. But, you know, our goal is to always make sure that we actually overcome these situations and make sure that that community understands that we're not like the developer that gave them, you know, empty promises, you know, from before, and look at the projects that we've developed that are actually operating so they can go feel, touch, and understand, you know, what we actually develop. So that's very, very, very important. You know, so for us, we pay a lot of attention, you know, to the zoning process, and it's critical for us to also bring in the right law firm that understands, you know, that neighborhood planning unit, especially for Atlanta, or even if we're in other, you know, cities. You know, we develop throughout the Southeast and also in the Midwest. And once you get westbound, it is the wild, wild west. There's a lot of things that you don't expect to ever happen will happen, you know, so keeps you on your toes. But we continue to make sure, you know, in our deals that we focus on that part. You know, for me, one of my biggest mistakes was, I made a lot of mistakes, but I tell you, if you're not making mistakes, you're not doing anything. You're not taking risk, and this is a business of risk. But one of the ones that kind of just, you know, come to mind immediately was related to an easement, a recorded easement on land. And basically, I failed to recognize that recorded easement on the plat. And I was just so gung-ho. It was my first project. I was running on my own. And basically, I wanted to impress, you know, my bosses and whatnot. It's my first deal. And I went forward with the design. Architect and engineers asked me, "Are you sure there are no easements?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, we're good. We're good to go. Let's move forward. We need to get this building designed." Well, lo and behold, we designed over this easement that we were not allowed to design over. That's after hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of design. So we had to move the entire building. So you could imagine how, what kind of conversation that was, you know, for me. So I understand, you know, how it feels when you're early on, you're at your career and making these types of mistakes. You know, the next thing I'd love to ask you guys is, I mean, considering how tough this business is, you know, what keeps you passionate about the business?
What keeps me passionate is the ability to see my work implemented in Atlanta. I think Atlanta is a really exciting city to work because it is a place where you can really affect the trajectory of the growth of the city. It's small enough where you can really make a change. If I was working in Chicago or New York or someplace on the West Coast, I don't think that that would be the case. But Atlanta is still a young city and it's a growing city, and to be able to be part of that positive change that's happening in the city is really exciting for me. And the other thing with the work that we're doing at the Atlanta Land Trust is really working to ensure that the growth benefits those folks that have been in Atlanta for a very long time. So for me, that's what fuels me to make sure that the growth that happens in Atlanta positively affects everybody that lives here, not just the newcomers in Atlanta, but legacy residents that have been here for decades, and that the growth is inclusive.
How about for you, Ceasar? I mean, you're tipping on almost 30 years in this business too, right?
I'll tell you what keeps me passionate about real estate is really very similar to what Amanda said, and that's really you can see the results in 3 dimensions, and to see the work product not just necessarily be a signed loan agreement or a signed deed, but literally a building or a house that comes out of the ground that provides a place for a family to live or for a business to grow and prosper. That's incredibly satisfying. And for me, I've had an opportunity to have that impact, candidly, not only as a lawyer, but also as a public policy maker, as a council member, and then as council president. And so I can literally ride around town and see projects that I worked on that literally have come out of the ground and are now fully functioning. And on top of that, see policies that have been put in place that I may have authored or created that allow for that project to move forward in a way that candidly may not have been possible without that policy.
We have an opportunity every day to develop great communities, transform lives, but also create social reform. And that's part of our whole mission as a company. So that's what keeps me going every day, regardless of the roller coaster rides. Considering that we're talking about acquisition today, are there just couple experience shares that you would want to share with our audience today relative to some of the things that are critical for them to focus on during the acquisition process? And those are really, really important, and where you see a lot of people make faux pas or spend a lot of money or time, spin their wheel, can never get the deal moving forward because they did not address those specific things at the onset of the deal. And so they were never able to shape their deal, See, from a legal standpoint.
And I guess some of this is, from the standpoint of what I've seen as an elected official.
Yeah.
And I think about what's happened at Turner Field, and now it's currently a completely different place since the Braves left and went to Cobb County and relocated there. Now you have what is a growing community that will certainly serve the students of Georgia State and really serve the surrounding community that's been there for a very long time with quality goods and services. And so one of the things when I think about that particular project, it reminds me of how important it is for a developer to understand and embrace this idea of partners and partnership. And one of the most critical partners you will have when you're a developer is government.
Yes.
And you must enter into every transaction, every deal, understanding that government is going to be your partner. And you should have that perspective versus a perspective that government is going to be an impediment for you. How do I get around government? And I think that's one of the things that I've seen candidly in deals that have been successful and that are thriving is that the developer understood that government is the partner. Starting from the process of just shaking someone's hand at City Hall and saying, hey, I want to do this project. How can government help me and how can I help government? I think that's incredibly important because the land use process is the beginning of that relationship, or the land use and zoning process is the beginning of that relationship, and it continues until it ends past permitting and past the certificate of occupancy.
Great. I mean, that's very interesting. Most people think that unless you have a public-private partnership. That's the only time you're really engaging with government. But government is definitely, your friend throughout the process, even if it's just a privately, a private development. How about you, Amanda? What kind of nuggets you'd like to share?
Well, I totally agree with what Ceasar said, and building on this concept of partnerships, maybe unconventional partnerships. I think the community, you have to view the community as a critical partner and stakeholder in your project. And in order for that relationship to be successful, you need to engage the community as early as possible. And it's challenging when you're going through the acquisition process because you don't know if you're going to ultimately close on the land or not, and so you don't want to go out too early. You want to manage expectations, but I think getting the community involved as early as possible and getting their input and their buy-in is critically important to ensuring a smooth acquisition, a smooth rezoning process, and ensuring that the project really meets the needs of the community and that it ultimately will be successful. So I think engaging the community as early as possible before you need to ask them for something in particular, because if the first time they meet you is when you're coming and asking for an approval, it's going to be very transactional, and you want to avoid that. You want to build a partnership and a relationship with the community.
That's true. The other side to that is the fact that many developers or aspiring developers don't do a self-evaluation before they proceed with a deal. I always tell, our team members, why us? Why should they sell this building or this land to us? What sets us apart from everybody else who's competing, for this property? We need to, gain their confidence. Sometimes it's not all about the price. It's a matter of who has the experience and can actually close. So for a lot of the aspiring developers, it's important for them to evaluate, their experience. Are you equipped? Are you prepared? Are you, to actually proceed with this acquisition? Do you have the right partners on your side from a private standpoint to actually, present a letter of intent on this project, and people will take it seriously or not? Can you close on this deal? Do you have the right capital, in place in order to meet the closing requirements for this deal? Will a lender even pay attention to you? Do you have the right credit worthiness, in order to do this transaction? But, and also, do you have the right team in place in order to shape this project and move forward with that acquisition? And those are some of the things that, I see that are recurring mistakes, missteps that are happening amongst all of, with a lot of developers that are doing their deals for the first time or second time, or who've been in business and continue to, have, more failures than successes. And they've never really learned how to address some of these critical issues on the front end of the project because they get so gung-ho about doing the deal. Everybody wants to move forward with a new deal, and you become a deal junkie, and you just are just thirsty for your next deal, and you want to see it out of the ground. But there's just so much that goes on the front end that you got to be very, very tactical about. Relative to, just the due diligence phase of the acquisition process, are there a couple of things that just kind of stand out to mind that you could actually, share, with, our audience today, that you would say, hey, look, I would definitely focus on 1, 2 of these 3 things, on the deal that you're working on?
Oh, well, I'll say a couple of things. Number one, know the land or the dirt that you have, and you need to know whether or not you can do what you desire to do on that land. And that means, do you have correct zoning? Number one. Number two, I think you've also got to make sure that you have had really strong conversations with your financial partner to ensure that whatever the plans are that you have, that you can afford it, and that the bank or whomever your equity partners are willing to finance it. I think those are 2 very critical things to have in place when you start off with an acquisition process.
Right.
And to your point, Eddie, that you made earlier, I think having your team in place when you put the property under contract, so you can immediately start with your due diligence and everybody knows their role and they can adhere to a timeline.
That's really, really important. And, you know, from my standpoint, I continue to go back to, you know, just understanding that DNA, you know, of the deal. I would say that repeatedly within our organization. And I say that to anybody that I'm addressing from a mentorship standpoint. And so these are some of the, you know, very critical things that we need to keep in mind every time we're looking at a deal or we're looking to shape our deal. It's just so great to have you, you know, here in this setting to also share a little bit about your background, you know, your pains in this industry, and also giving, you know, our audience here, you know, some takeaways that will help them shape their next deal. So thank you. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
All right.